Welcome everybody to our May OWASP Boston chapter meeting, and welcome everybody. Today our sponsors are for our food is provided by LastCon, our annual conference, and facilities provided by National Instruments. I'm Tiana Chandler, the chapter leader, and we have other folks here in the room who are also on our chapter leadership. If you want to have any questions about the chapter, please contact one of us or just come and talk to us. This meeting is eligible for 1 CPE hour, and for right now, the way we have it set up is if you could just email me, I can send you a certificate. If you wanted to provide support for OWASP chapter and OWASP in general, but we do have some volunteer opportunities, whether you want to get involved with the leadership or any speaker opportunities, such as speaking at one of these meetings, or even just getting involved with any other local events that we may announce. And if you shop with Amazon, if you do the smile.amazon.com and select OWASP, a portion of your purchase would go towards supporting OWASP. To attend these meetings or to use other resources for OWASP, you do not need to be a member. However, we do encourage you to give back to the community, so to speak, and there's various ways you can get memberships, whether an individual or if your company would like to do a corporate membership, or if you're a student. You can go to the OWASP.org and go to the Austin chapter page, and then there's a link to see more information about the memberships. Also, Griff, raise your hand. He's our membership coordinator, so if you have any questions, you can ask him. We have a weekly study group that is also here at National Instruments during the lunch hour every Thursday at a different building. Matt Pardo is our education coordinator. I believe they just finished this book on attacking network protocols, and I'm not sure if there's anything announced yet on what's going to be next. But if you want to follow the discussion on that, the Austin OWASP Slack channel for study group should probably be announced there. Did you?
Sorry, we just finished this book right here. We're going to start next going through some reverse engineering courses. Malware Unicorn, you may have seen them on the web, so we're going to start working on those.
Thanks, Chris. As I mentioned, LastCon is our annual conference, which also funds all of our activities with our chapter. We're in the planning process of for this year's, which is going to be October 23rd to 26th, where we are going to plan on having 2 days of training days and then the 2 days for the conference itself. We have call for presentations open right now, as well as call for trainers. If you just go to lastcon.org, you can find out more information there. Upcoming chapter events. I do have a placeholder here for OWASP Austin training. We have been in discussions about doing some one-off trainings throughout the year, still having discussions about that, so just stay tuned. And Austin Security Professionals Happy Hour, the next one should be in June 14th, and then we're going to hold it again at Baby Acapulco's on Stone Lake Boulevard. Other upcoming local events, I just have a few of them listed here. Larry, I think you wanted to also mention something about some training that ISSA is providing as well.
Hi, I'm Larry Moore. I'm the president of the Austin chapter of ISSA. We have 2 classes coming up. Michael Goff will be giving a presentation on malware management. This is a hands-on class. A laptop will be required. On Tuesday, I believe it's July 17th, Phil Byer, one of the board members here, will be presenting a class on management and leadership, CISO-type roles. That will be on August 21st. If you go to austinissa.org, you'll go under training events. You'll get a list for both classes. There is a discount for ISSA members.
Thanks, Larry. Was there anybody else here from either of these organizations or another organization that wanted to make an announcement? Also wanted to take the time here to for job opportunities, whether there's any company that has any job openings they want to announce.
Hey everybody, my name is David. This is Jaffa. We work at All Clear ID. We have a position open for a senior SecOps engineer. So if you like tinkering, have a strong technical background, and like to automate things, come and find either of us and talk to us. Thanks.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, and now I'd like to present the Trust, Designing Privacy, Consent, and Security into your products for Taylor McCaslin.
Hi, everybody. Yes, hello. So this is actually my first time at an OWASP Austin meeting. I've spoken at a couple as I've been traveling around, so excited to join you here in my hometown. So let's dive into this. Today I'm going to talk to you about trust. And trust is a really interesting concept. But first, let me tell you why you should trust me. My name is Taylor McCaslin. I'm a product manager focused on mobile at Duo Security. I have 6 years of experience focused on usability at high-scale, high-growth companies. You can see those logos there at the bottom. One thing that I always like to talk about is I actually have a theater and dance degree, which is just, I think, hysterical. But I always like to talk about that because I think it's really important that you don't need to have a computer science background to work in security or technology. And in fact, I love when people don't have technology backgrounds because I think it brings a really different viewpoint to your craft. And at UT, I studied business, digital art, media, and computer science. I'm really fascinated by the intersection of disciplines. And I think in security and technology in particular, it's a really useful concept to be able to think multidisciplinary. So I had this moment where when I was looking at the companies that I worked at, like I'd actually worked in trust for a long time. When you look at UT, I used to work at the IT help desk, really helping users make sure that their accounts were trusted within the UT system. At Bazaar Voice, ratings and reviews company, helping end users trust products online. At Lynn Digital, we were getting brands to trust us with their marketing dollars. At Indeed, getting users who didn't have jobs to trust us on their job search. At WP Engine, helping brands gain trust online. And at Duo, we're helping secure people, applications, and we're securing users, applications with identities. So it's interesting when I think about this concept of trust. Today, we're going to talk about what is trust, the types of trust that exist, why we should care about trust at all. We'll take a look at a couple of tech fails with trust. I actually think looking at failure is a really great way to understand and to really see how trust can go wrong. And then we'll talk about actually building trust into your product. So what's fascinating to me is that trust underlies everything in our everyday lives, but we don't actually really think about trust. In fact, I challenge you to try to think, how do you know you trust something? And in fact, when I was building this presentation, it's actually really difficult to find one singular definition of trust. Trust means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts to a lot of different people. Even culturally, it means different things. When you think about it, when you're driving here to work in the morning, you're trusting that everyone is going to obey traffic signals and lights and rules of the road. When you think about your family, you trust that they care about you, that they make decisions that are going to help and benefit you. The same thing for our companies. When we choose technology and software, we're trusting that that's going to help us actually solve whatever our problems are that we're using that technology for. But we don't really think about all this. This is all very subconscious, which makes trust a really interesting concept to try to design for, because it's really difficult and amorphous. And like I said, it depends on the context. So what is trust? Let me start by introducing these two women. Wonderful researchers here, Frances Fay. She's at the Harvard Business School. You may have heard of her. She was the former SVP at Uber for leadership and strategy, really helping them shift what trust means at Uber. She has since left there. And then Rachel Botsman. She is at the University of Oxford at their business school. She's also written a fantastic book that if you're fascinated by this concept of trust after this talk, I highly recommend you go and read. It's Who Can You Trust? Really great book. I'll talk you through some of the concepts that they introduce here. So these two women, I think, have really interesting concepts of trust, and I want to talk you through them. The first one is Frances, and she really talks about psychological trust. This is about face-to-face. How do you trust someone else? And I like to talk about this because we have to understand how we trust other humans before we talk about how do we trust other services and machines. So it's a triangle, as all things are in technology. You'll see lots of triangles throughout this, but trust in her definition, this is from her TED Talk a few years ago, is really three key components. Think of it as a stool. If any one of these three things is missing, trust falls down completely. Authenticity, logic, and empathy. Those are words that we largely can understand and grasp. And it makes logical sense that these three things roll up into trust. So when we talk about authenticity, this is really simple for humans. It's just being authentic. It's being yourself. This is one of the reasons that I really like to speak very openly about myself, my background, my experiences, because it's a really easy way to build trust and authenticity. When you're yourself, people can just naturally understand that, and they just inherently start to trust you. Logic is an interesting one. We're not going to go into much about logic, or if your logic is flawed or not. I can't help you there. However, we're all logical beings for the most part. We can detect and find flaws in logic. So if we don't believe someone's being logical, it's hard to have trust in that person. And then finally is empathy. And this one's really interesting because it's not just the fact of having empathy. I can be an empathetic person, but unless my empathy is directed towards you, it's harder to trust. So when you get empathy towards yourself, it's easy to trust that person because you sense they're being empathetic to you. Oh, there's those points. Yeah, you're more likely to trust me if all those things are true. If you feel like I'm being authentic, if you sense that I have a real rigor in my logic, and if you believe my empathy is directed towards you. All three of those things work in tandem to help build trust with someone. And these things are instantaneous. They take just a few seconds to develop. You've probably heard the adage that trust takes a lifetime to build, seconds to break, and is impossible to repair. That's pretty true with humans, though I actually think it's a lot faster to develop. Humans naturally are very trusting beings, which is fantastic. I think it's one of the pieces that really gives me excitement when I think about the future of humanity and us focusing on trust. I think if we focus on trust, we'll be able to really unlock a lot of what humanity has to offer us. I do want to talk about logic real fast because she makes a fantastic point in this tech talk that I think has honestly changed the way I interact with my teams. More triangles here. There's two ways to talk about logic. There's a bottom-up triangle and a right-up triangle. And it's very simple when I explain this. Basically, there are some people who like to tell a long story. We're going to take you on a journey. We're going to go back and forth. And then at some point, once I've walked you through all of the reasons, I'm going to get to my point, and I'm going to share you my idea. There are other people who start point blank and say, this is what I believe, and then they walk the line of A, B, and C to explain why. There's a really key difference by why one of these things is better than the other. It's because attention. We don't have large attention spans, and in fact, I'm sure the women in the audience will definitely understand being interrupted. I implore you, go with this second one, because when you get interrupted, if you've already said your idea, you get credit for it, and people hear your point. Ideas and logic are much more effective when you say exactly what you mean up front and then give all of the reasons why that is a logical point. This has truly changed the way that I interact with my teams and has made me more effective as a product manager. I encourage you to think about this more in your own life, but I encourage you to think about this in your technology products too. How can you put the point up front and then make supporting evidence rather than doing it in reverse? Is a way to start building trust and to help people understand what you're trying to get them to do, but then the backing support to back up your point. So now let's switch to Rachel. Rachel talks a lot about trust and community. She talks a lot about Airbnb, Uber. This is the classic. As kids, we were told, don't meet anyone on the internet, don't get in a car with strangers. And then ironically, that's exactly what Uber does. It connects us to strangers on the internet whose cars we get into. Very strange. Technology opens up a lot for us to really shift our ideas as a society. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So let's talk about human to community here. Rachel has this definition of trust, which I kind of like. It's very non-standard. Trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. And this is particularly true in communities. When you connect two unknown people, you can't rely on the fact that they know each other to trust each other. Instead, you have to bridge that gap. Rachel talks about this as a trust leap. You need to go from known to trust the unknown. And there's a lot of uncertainty there. There's a lot of things you can do to help bridge this gap. And she talks about 3 concepts that make up the trust stack. And again, this is for communities. So you need to trust the idea, the reason that you're both in this community to begin with. You need to trust the platform, the actual platform that you're transacting on. And then you need to trust the other user. She goes through a lot of examples. I'll use Airbnb here to illustrate this point. Airbnb is basically classic supply and demand. I have excess real estate that I don't use. You want somewhere cheap to stay. Those are unison in logic, and that they have a nice benefit value for both. You give me some money, I let you stay at my place, you get a cheaper rate than a hotel and maybe a unique experience. This is the founding underlying principle of Airbnb. So great, we trust the idea. There's value, everyone wins with that idea. Cool, what about the platform? Airbnb, we know now is a trusted platform. Back in 2012, it was unclear if we were gonna be okay with letting strangers stay in our houses, or for that matter, staying in a stranger's house. Airbnb had an interesting problem to solve, and they did it largely through design of how do you build a platform that 2 unknowing parties trust. They do this a lot with building profiles. They encourage you when you build a profile to put your photo, put some content. They have lots of training, and when you onboard as a seller, they have a lot of content about how to get people to trust you. And on the opposite side, when you're a buyer, when you are staying somewhere, they encourage you to contact your host, to share a little bit about yourself, to try to help build that trust between 2 otherwise unknowing parties. And then finally, trust the other user. That is that final piece where to actually transact, I do need to develop some form of trust. So this is the trust stack. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details. She has a ton of examples in her book. I highly recommend you go and read that. But it's an interesting way to think about communities. So we've talked about human to human, and we've talked about human to community. But what's interesting is that trust is changing. Trust is not the same as it was back in ancient times. In fact, when we look at history, there's the evolution of trust. And this is, again, more work from Rachel in her book. She talks about how trust used to be local. It used to be in the communities that we were around. In ancient Rome, people didn't move around a lot. They knew who they were neighbors with. They knew who their communities were. That was the center of trust. If you, went and stole something, the whole town knew. As we've moved to become a more industrialized society, people move around. People travel all over the place. So that local idea of trust doesn't work anymore because people are moving around too much. I can go be a bad person in one city and then go to another city and no one knows. So we shifted to institutional trust. This is trust in banks, trust in churches, trust in organizations that could help us navigate trust for unknown individuals. If for example, if I were Christian and I went to church and I did that in whatever cities I were in, that's a good sort of litmus test for my character. Just in this example, that's a flawed example. But what's interesting is we've lost trust in these institutions. In fact, the banking crisis is a great example of how we've lost trust in the banking industry. One person went to jail for all of that terrible stuff that happened to the banking crisis. I know I'm really cutting a lot of this short. There's a lot of content. So Rachel does a great job talking through all of these examples. So we're moving to this model of distributed trust. And what's interesting about distributed trust is that there is no single party who gets to say this is true or not. Instead, it's a whole lot of different people all acknowledging that, yeah, this looks right to me. And we get a collective hive mind of truth. So when we look at the differences between institutional and distributed truth, these are some of the properties that are different between the two of them. I'm not going to go through and explain all of these. They're pretty self-explanatory. But what I find so interesting is that this distributed trust model is a lot of things that we see problematic in tech today. Being transparent with things like privacy, being inclusive with things like diversity, building decentralized systems that can scale and are fault tolerant, being accountable. Again, how do we build that trust online? That reputation that we see ratings and reviews online, we see reputation scores. What does it mean to be accountable in today's technology age? And then what's really cool is that it's bottom up. Technology has empowered tons of people who otherwise would not have gotten to really try or be able to experience technology to go and put an idea out there and let the world see it. It's a really bottoms-up idea. So there's a lot of really great things about distributed trust. I'm not going to go and convince you today why blockchains are a great idea. That is definitely not what I'm here to do. Rachel does talk about blockchain as an example of technology here that enables distributed trust, but there's tons of ideas here that support the same idea. And she goes on to explain this idea of trust fleets. And I really like this, especially when you see it sort of outlined here. And you'll see a lot of things we've talked about. You'll see this shift from local trust to institutional trust to then distributed trust. So we see horse and carts and trains. These are things that very easy to locally trust. It's easy, like, oh yeah, that's my next door neighbor and his horse. Like I know he knows how to rear a horse or whatever. Like local trust. Then we move to trains, trust in institutions, the manufacturers of cars. We're trusting Volvo and BMW and Ford that they're making those cars safely. And same thing for airliners. Again, that trust in institutions. And then we're seeing this rise of the sharing economy, this sort of move towards distributed trust. What does it mean to ride share, to have autonomous cars where humans aren't even involved? And in the future, Elon Musk talks about rocket travel. What does that trust look like? This plays out in industry after industry after industry, this move of trust leaps. And a lot of this is empowered by technology. Technology allows us to make these trust leaps. In fact, technology accelerates the rate we make these trust leaps, and it further distributes the trust. This is a really interesting concept, and I think is fundamental to how you have to think about trust. Technology moves at a blazing pace. It's something that we all struggle to keep up with. I know I use so many different mechanisms to understand what's happening in the industry, what news is happening, who's being breached, all of the things that add up to a collective understanding of technology. There's just a lot coming at you. And then to think about, we're in a relatively privileged group of people who understand how technology impacts us, but most people are not. I will tell you, if there was one thing that I learned from the US election, it was that I didn't understand America at all. I thought I did, and then come to find out, like, I actually don't understand what motivates America. When we woke up and Donald Trump was president, that was a moment for me to really say, I need to go back and reevaluate how I think about America and what America actually thinks about technology. I'm not here to talk about politics, but I think it's a really interesting way to think about what drives and motivates people, particularly across America. But we see this play out again and again in various other countries. Brexit in the UK, China with their crazy ideas of social capital and social trust. This plays out, and technology is enabling it. So let's talk about types of trust. This is from a study from HSBC. They're a bank. This is from their 2017 Trust and Technology Report. Really fascinating thing. I highly encourage you to go look at it. It's a study of about 12,000 people across 11 different countries. But they like to talk about trust in these 4-quadrant mechanisms. So on the x-axis, you've got long-term and short-term. And on the y-axis, you've got shallow and deep trust. And maybe not trust, but sort of like the level at which these technologies operate. And it calls into 4 categories. If there's something temporary and shallow, it's lustful. It is quick to come and go. It's very shallow. On the opposite end of that, you've got long-term and deep, which is about love. That's a really interesting concept. I'm not even going to try to get into that with technology of how to create technologies people love, but it's an interesting concept to think about this. And then the other 2, which I think are the primary quadrants that are true for technology, is necessary and functional. Functional things are, we use them to whatever value point they have to us, but only until they stop functioning. Once they stop functioning, we stop using them. And then there's necessary. These things are long-term. They don't necessarily have to function very well or even the best. They're just necessary, so we have to keep using them. So let's look at this and take a look at how, there we go. How do sort of current concepts fall into these trust categories? You see friends and family there, people we love. That's pretty obvious. Generally long-term relationships that are deep and meaningful connections to us. You see deep and temporary are sort of those experts. When you go to the doctor, the dentist, we trust those experts in our moment of need to give us very deep but transitory knowledge about whatever ails us at that moment. Work, government, financial institutions, things that are necessary to facilitate normal life. We need to make money. We need to be able to transact. We need to have rule and order. And then what's interesting is, and again, this is a study from about 12,000 people. Startups and new tech end up in this lust category, which I think is actually probably pretty true. We have seen this played out certainly with new technologies like blockchain, where everyone's so excited, and then it sort of goes away, and then it comes back as sort of a standard technology where it moves up into that functional category, and people start to understand it. So this is sort of how people think about things today. Let's actually take a look at that with brands. I find this really fascinating. You see a lot of typical hardware and websites here, largely in the functional category. I'm actually fascinated by Apple bleeding into the love category. I personally am an Apple fan, so I understand this. It's sort of that very deep, invested love in a company. There's lots of reasons why Apple has succeeded there. I encourage you to take a look at the things Apple is doing with privacy, with their used to be a focus on quality, their integrated ecosystems, beautiful hardware, things that create love. Whereas Samsung is creating devices that literally you cannot take on planes, and they will tell you explicitly, this phone will blow up at the airport. Not a great thing for building trust with a brand. And then I think it's fascinating that banks come out as a necessary evil. In fact, a lot of what this study sort of comes out to say is that banks have gotten away with a lot of things because we have to use them. They're difficult to move your money around, so we end up staying with them even if we hate them. Cable companies are another one, though cable companies are getting better at switching now. In fact, just cutting the cord altogether. So really fascinating sort of look at how you plot trust. Why do we care? So this is again from that HSBC study. People believing technology will make the world better. The average here is the average score of the US, 67% globally. You can see that in Asian countries, there's a general belief that technology will make the world better. You see that reduced quite a bit in the European Union. And then in the US, we're sort of like mediocre about it. I think this is fascinating because slightly more than half of people trust technology. They believe it's going to make it a better place. But what's interesting is that when you ask them about particular technologies, they've never heard of them. So this is people who've never heard of technology out of this study. Of course, blockchain shows up there, robo-advising, chat bots, automated telephone prompts, digital wallets, voice recognition. I'm happy to see this, fingerprint and facial being on the low end of things people don't understand. It's very easy once people talk you through how a fingerprint reader or an iris scan works, why you would trust those things over traditional things like passwords. A lot of this comes down to when you explain something to somebody, they trust it. They need to understand it. So we have people believe in technology that's going to make the world a better place, but technology is moving at a pace of innovation that makes it hard for those people to understand the technology that is fundamentally underlying all of the products that we use every single day. Here's the one that really blows my mind. Same study. What are the concerns of people in their day-to-day life? I want you to take a quick look at this. There's a mix here, millennial, Gen X, baby boomers. I'm not really caring about the generation here. You'll see they actually follow pretty closely. But what's really fascinating to me, every single one of these things is a technology problem. People are more concerned about their data being leaked, their bank accounts being hacked, their credit cards being stolen, than they are about serious illness or being mugged or being lied to by family members. This is the problem we have in technology with trust. The things that are generating the most concern for people are a fragment of the things that we've done with technology to lose people's trust. This study is really fascinating. I'm looking forward to the 2018 report, which should come out in the next month or two. They're doing some interesting studies. One thing that I will point out here is that the difference here between generations is pretty stable until you get to the very end here. These last three are where a lot of the shifts between generations appear. But what you'll find is that with technology, generations share a lot of understanding and concerns here. So technology distrust is the cause of a lot of our daily worry. This is why we have to care about trust, because we need to solve these problems. This is literally taking up mental brain space in people's ability to think, because they're worried about things they either don't understand, they don't have control over, or they just purely don't trust. This is what we have to solve. So let's look at some examples of how have we gotten here. It would be remiss if I didn't bring up Equifax. We all know what happened here. Huge breach of consumer information. I think the biggest thing here was that most people didn't realize Equifax had their information. We here largely understand the idea of credit reports and how things make it onto our credit reports. A lot of people don't. They don't understand that when you go to apply for a loan or whatnot, that information is sent to these credit bureaus. We didn't even know they had this information, and then it got breached. What's crazy here is the amount of information: date of birth, social security name, address, gender, phone number. These are things that are very difficult to change, if you can at all. And now they're just out there in the public. Photos of driver's license, passport, social security cards. This is mind-baffling that this company went and lost this much personal information that people didn't even know they had. Let's look at another interesting one, Grindr. This is a gay chat app. Health and safety data compromises. I will be very frank with you and say I am an openly gay man. I am not concerned about HIV. We have medication for that. What we don't have is if insurance companies find out your HIV status. Grindr was leaking HIV status to third-party analytics firms. Oh my God. That is like, in any medical sense, would be medical grade information that needs to be properly secured through HIPAA. And they're tossing it into third-party analytics solutions. What? This is insane. If an insurance company had gotten a hold of this data, think of what they could have done. Denied coverage, raised premiums. HIV is stigmatized in general. This can literally ruin someone's life. With their ability to get a job or their view of in society. Also, they had a third-party data leak where basically the location of you using the app, even if you weren't actively using the app or had it turned off, would still leak your information and could be viewed by third parties. Again, like, wow, people are using this app to try to find connection, and this app is actively selling out their data. I'm not even selling it out, giving it out. Huge concerns from a privacy standpoint. Interesting side note, Grindr is also owned by China now. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but just interesting fact. Most people don't recognize that. In fact, that was largely suppressed in the media. This one's actually from this weekend. FBI urgent request, reboot your router to stop Russian linked malware. 50,000 routers in 54 countries, Linksys, Netgear, TP-Link, likely routers that you have in your home. I will say, if you had not seen this, please go home and restart your router and revert it to its original firmware or update it. The really terrible thing here is that if you've ever tried to like log into your router, this is not something that the average American is going to be able to do. Very complicated, very hard to do. And yeah, just this weekend. And this is our internet traffic. Literally, like the things we were doing online, potentially going wherever, to Russia. Facebook, I don't need to talk about this one, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. What's interesting here is that we've all developed for Facebook, I'm sure. It didn't occur to me how the data that is in Facebook could be leveraged against us. That's the real interesting piece about the Facebook data thing, is that we voluntarily put this information out there, not realizing how it could be used to influence our behaviors and potentially be used to sway elections. Fascinating case study on how our private data can be used against us. I have to put this photo up here. Zuckerberg, in a tweet on Instagram, if you look closely here, he covers his audio port and his camera with tape. Tech executives don't even trust the hardware that you're using. How many of you here have tape over your camera? I do. Yeah, quite a few. We literally don't trust the technology. We literally put pieces of tape over it to try to prevent people from spying on us. Whether that's true or not, it's a reality. It's a fundamental aspect of trust. So this gets us to this core concept of how do we build trust in tech products. So I've sort of walked you through trust with individuals, trust in communities. Now we've got to talk about trust between human and machine, H to M. So here's this lovely graph again. I've plotted my personal perception of how certain technologies sort of fall on this grid. We can argue about where they go in the quadrants, but I think generally this is very true. You'll see things that are lustful. I actually like the example of like as seen on TV things that you're like, yes, I need to buy that right now, but it actually is very shallow in value. Low value luxury items, like high value, that cost lots and lots of money but don't provide much value, or another example of lustful things. We get into necessary things that are anything related to transactions, financial, trades, anything related to that, just necessary, and varying levels of trust there. We've got things with high switching costs on the end there, things like banks, things that we have shallow relationships, we just have to have them. You see the love category, fanboys. I actually like that concept. It's a really interesting thought experience to think through examples where fanboys can be used to understand what's happening. Apple fanboys, Android fanboys are a great example to look at here. You've got computers, phones, and wearables all in the functional category. We use them until they're not functional anymore. Wearables, very deep because they're collecting data about our lives. Phones, higher than computers because we literally carry them with us everywhere we go, collecting all sorts of sensor data. So this is sort of how I see the landscape today. Here's the problem with these, and when trust goes wrong. Things become forgotten, they lack utility, they don't meet expectations, fraud and compromise, they actually literally break. Hardware and software failures, these are the things that undermine trust in these pieces of technology. So trust is a fundamental differentiator for tech. If we use this as a litmus, we can really think about trust as a way to differentiate. I am going to just blatantly say this and say that the future is trust. tech products that get trust right will succeed more in the market, I believe, in the future. We already see that play out today. It will only become more important as we move to more distributed trust models. So let's go back to this idea of trust between humans. It's hard to apply these to technology products. We'll look through that here in a second. But the core of this is right: authenticity, logic, and empathy. We need to believe that the tech products are being authentic, that they're representing the brands that we're buying into. When you think about branding, it is largely, I agree with the values that a company has. That is sort of the value of brand. And because I agree with those values, I see them in myself, I trust that brand more. So brand authenticity. Logic is pretty straightforward. Machines, luckily, are logical until humans introduce failed logic. So that's, we pretty much get that one. Logic, I think, is a really interesting thing to think through in terms of autonomous cars. Cars are doing logical, just pure processing. It's how we program them that makes that questionable in truth. And then empathy. What happens when things go wrong? With technology, it's a really difficult piece because how do you make a machine feel empathy? There's tons of studies about this, tons of movies. What does it mean to have empathy as a machine? Can it even do that? Is that a fundamentally human characteristic? We can design technology to feel empathetic. And then this is another one from Rachel from her book. She categorizes these traits of trustworthiness: competence, reliability, honesty, competence, and that the thing actually does the job that it signed up to do. Pretty easy. If it doesn't do that, I'm going to stop using it. Reliable, and then it needs to consistently, repeatably be able to solve that problem that it's solving for me. The moment it doesn't, I stop using it. And then honesty, the fact that, or the sort of perception that what it's doing aligns with what I think it's doing. And when that trust is broken, I stop using it. Both of these are interesting concepts when you think about how humans and communities work, but it applies to technology as well. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of beliefs of what I believe is what you need to do to build trust in technology products. The first one is education. And this is sort of where you need to prove your product's competency and show your work. You need to show why your project or your product actually solves these problems. Make it clear what's doing, what's happening, and why it's happening. If you do that alone, that is such a huge boost in trust. There are so many technology products today that do things that we just don't understand. We literally don't understand how the results came out. In fact, I'd say this is one of the biggest problems with AI right now, is that it goes and does something and then we don't know why. It's literally like, oh, it's just math. Like, how do you go and like QA that? It did something wrong, but can I determine why it actually went and did that? Very difficult. So make it clear what's happening and why. You've got to set those expectations. Explain and prove value. Great, you've told me what you're going to do and why. Now show me what it did and the value that it created for me. Prove to me that you're doing the job that I signed you up for as a product. This is how you start building some of that trust to start getting people to continuously use your product. When I can visibly draw a connection to the value you're getting from me, it's hard to replace that. I need to then find another product that can provide to me that value. It's a great way to build stickiness into your product. I like to think about value in 10x. I don't want a 1x value product. That's something that's very trivial. If you can give me 10x the value, that's a product that I'm going to continue to use because it fundamentally changes how I accomplish a task. Give me 10x value, and that's a product that I'll use forever. Consistency builds confidence. When you're talking about education and explaining things to people, you've got to be consistent in language, in action, in tone, in voice. It's little tiny things about consistency that help build trust. When you're not consistent, you create confusion, you create a distrust. It's one that humans don't necessarily, they can't verbalize it. They just know, like, something's not right here. The logic seems flawed. The two sides of the bridge don't quite meet. You've got to be consistent. One of the best things you can do if you've got a technology product is go hire a UX writer. A UX writer can bring a new level of consistency and clarity to the words in your product. Be relevant. Solve a problem that I actually have. You need to, so humans contact interactions. So when I'm interacting with anyone here, if you come up and ask me questions, I'm going to want to know more about you so that I can talk to you relevant to your security level knowledge or your years of experience. That helps me set my expectation of how I'm going to interact with you. Tech products need to do the same thing. Don't treat everyone as if they're the same. Use all of the data that you're amassing about people to make intelligent decisions about, oh, is this someone who's brand new to this service? Maybe I need to hold their hand a little more. Is this someone who's ran 100 campaigns in this tool before? Great, you know what you're doing. I just need to tell you when things change. Leverage that context of information to be contextual. And then build common sense. This one is fascinating to me, how senseless technology can be. This is a great example that I like to use is travel agents knowing you mean Paris, France, and not Paris, Texas, whenever you're calling to book travel. I do not want a flight to Paris, Texas. In fact, I don't even want to visit Paris, Texas. I want to go to Paris, France. That's why I'm calling a travel agent. A travel agent gets that. There's a great story in Rachel's book about a person who actually booked travel to Paris, Texas, or to a different similarly named place. That just like common sense would have fixed that. Common sense is a difficult thing to build into technology, but it's becoming possible. So let's look at a couple examples here. Be clear. I have my own problems with Alexa, but one thing that I think they got really right is when that blue ring comes on, it's listening. That is a simple, easy thing a 3-year-old can understand. Alexa is listening to me. I feel bad for anyone on the phone whose Alexas I'm triggering, but also that's super fun too. And I will say, when I'm just at home and it turns blue and I didn't say Alexa, I'm like, ooh, something's not right. In fact, my Alexa is now unplugged forever. Regardless of what you think of the Alexa device, that blue ring was a genius way to build trust with people because it's exactly clear when and why it's doing what it's doing. Be consistent. This is from Apple's user experience guides. This is just a standard action modal. You know that the blue button is always the primary action. It is the reason you're trying to go and do something, and then generally a cancel button. We see these. We don't even have to read them because it's very obvious just through consistency what is about to happen. Bring consistency to your interfaces, and it will be revolutionary. And then prove value. This is something from Kissmetrics. Basically, it proves the effectiveness of its campaigns. It literally is explaining to you the value that it's creating for you. It's hard to sort of walk away from this. MailChimp does this really excellent as well. Prove the value that your product is creating. That's a product that's harder to replace. So let's talk about security. We looked at a lot of breaches of security. Security is one of the things that, like, we know how to solve this. It's just a matter of actually doing our due diligence to go and solve. Be reliable and empathize when things go wrong. Build security. If you leave here and do one thing, please go make your product secure. And I realize that is so much easier said than done. But we continue to see blatant failures of things that just common sense would have resolved. Make sure it does what it promises. If you're collecting data, if you're collecting information and you're not doing what you just would immediately think you'd be doing with that information, explain it to somebody. Make it extremely clear what you're doing. And make sure that what you're doing is what you promised to do. It's the reason why people sign up to use your product. Secure the data you're entrusted with it. Humans naturally are trusting individuals. We will give you whatever data you need to do whatever job we want. We're starting to get more concerned about that, but if people trust you with their data, please, please, please do everything you can to protect that. Of course, there are different classes of data. Some of them are regulated. Make sure you're using that regulation properly to secure that data. Very, very basic concept here. Also make security easy. I'm amazed. In fact, this is what Duo is founded on, is security is really hard to use, and so people don't use it. At Duo, we believe that when you make security easy to use, it becomes more effective. Please spend UX and design cycles on your security solution. Make it easy for people to use. We're seeing a lot of progress in this industry. UX design has come a long way. We're not making a lot of terrible black UX mistakes that we used to make, where we trap people into making the wrong decisions. But those things still do exist. Smart security defaults. If you talk about security and technology products, It's actually less about what you're actually doing behind the scenes and more about the defaults that you're choosing. Are you turning features on by default? Are you turning them off by default? What data are you sharing by default? All of the defaults are important because guess what? People don't change defaults. I think it's like 70 or 80% of people never even go to the settings panel of anything to change defaults. Please be really cognizant of the defaults that you're setting. One of the reasons my Alexa is unplugged forever is because I realized back in September last year that a feature called drop-in was on by default. What does drop-in allow you to do? It allows anybody with an Alexa device who has your contact information in their phone book, if they give permission for my phone book, they can leave me a voice message or a text message that will literally light up something in my room and read that message out loud. I had a terrible, also exciting troll on about 20 of my friends where I sent them a message to their Alexa letting them know how terrible and that they needed to go and turn drop-off off, a feature that was unannounced in the release notes, that was on by default. Nobody knew about it. Baffling. This is really insanity that this is like the state that we're in. I get it. Nobody changes defaults and you want people to use your products. So you set these defaults so that people get the experiences by default. How about we spend time onboarding people? When a new feature comes out, here's information about it. Do you want to use it? Yes or no? Smart security defaults. And then handle problems and errors. I'm amazed with technology how many times errors just like, oh, it broke. I love cute 404 pages, but it gives me no information about what went wrong. I have to go try to search for that information. Empower people rather than blame them. Technology is going to have problems. It's going to hit errors. Don't blame me as a user for that. That is not my problem. If anything, empower me to solve the solution. If I hit a 404 page, please give me a search box to search for that content. Even better, recommend content that's like the thing that I was looking for when I hit the 404 page. Super basic stuff here. Failed human interactions are considered one-off. When you have a bad experience at a restaurant, what do? You generally say, I want to talk to a manager. I don't believe that this interaction was, equal to your brand. This was a bad experience. However, when technology fails, there is no let me talk to a manager. This is terrible technology. I don't believe it's literally a hit to your brand. People stop trusting your brand because it doesn't work. It's an interesting difference between how people work and how people and machines work. To a manager. Make security easy. Again, with this Alexa example, you've already heard I have terrible thoughts about Alexa, but one thing that they did get right is when you press the mute button, it turns red. Oh my God, it's so logical. It's not listening. Now, we can argue if that is actually true or not, but they're at least communicating to me through design that the intention of what they're trying to do. When it's blue, it's listening and doing something. When it's red, it's not listening. Awesome. A 3-year-old can use Alexa. In fact, there's tons of great stories about children learning to go and buy things with accounts that people connect to Alexa. Don't do that. Design for empathy. This one, I was surprised. I love Spotify. This was an issue with the connection. An error occurred. I literally have no idea what happened. All I know is that my music is not playing, and that was the one job I signed you up to do. Tell me that the connection, you don't have an connection, like instantly. Oh, I get it. I need to go connect to the internet. Or better yet, like fail back, like auto try to connect, like try to solve this problem for me. Instead, literally, you are being useless. You're not even showing me any information here. Like literally, it's a black screen of uselessness. This, I think, has been fixed. Design for empathy. This is a great one. Again, MailChimp gets a lot of things right. I'm trying to sign in, and immediately it says, sorry, we couldn't find an account with that username. Great, you set my expectation. Okay, that's not an account here. I don't have to just keep trying. Did I have the wrong password or email or whatever? And then they say, can we help you? Here, let us help you resolve this issue. That's a great way to use error messages. Help people solve problems. Let's talk about privacy. This is where you get to be honest and act with authenticity. Privacy, I think, is one of the great ways that you can build trust. In fact, this is, in my opinion, why Apple succeeds so well. Be transparent about the data you collect and use. If you do one thing today, and I know I'm giving you a long list of things to go home and do, be transparent with the data that you're using. Be explicitly clear, even if you think it's super obvious. Again, be clear about what you're doing with people's data. When people know what you're doing with their data, they'll trust you more. Provide controls to consent or object. When you're collecting data, make sure that people know that you're collecting that data and give them an option to either send it or not. Let people object. Smart privacy defaults, just like security. We don't think a lot about the defaults that we bring to privacy. Please don't opt in people to features. That's a confuse, don't opt out. Yeah, ignore that last part, yeah. Just be very cognizant of your privacy defaults. And then explicitly state changes in behavior. I religiously read release notes for applications. I am a mobile product manager, so I get that most people don't do that. But I want to know when something changes because I want to know if my expectations of that application have changed. Please be verbose with this. Give me in-app experiences that walk me through those changes. I woke up this morning and I had a new update from Philips Hue, immediately telling me, hey, there's a new version of this app. It's completely changed the experience of how you interact with your home. I kind of need to know about that. Be very upfront with me and explain to me what has changed. Here's an example of what Apple's doing with transparency. If you've updated to, I think it's 11.3, you've seen this. I really think Apple got this right with this icon, this handshake. Privacy is about an agreement. It's about agreeing that two sides are trying to accomplish the same thing, and that for me to do that, I need to give you something. Apple now uses this icon anywhere that they collect or send your personal data. Really great concept here. Privacy controls. Twitter surprisingly gets this right after a whole lot of people complained about it. This is a verbose screen that tells me exactly how my data is going to be used to better my experience. I will tell you, Twitter suffers from some problems with the defaults that they choose. They enable a lot of things by default, but at least they give me a way to opt out of that and very clear explanation about what that data is doing. So how do you go and build all these things into your products? The thing that I really want to encourage you to do is go talk to real people who use your products. That is how you uncover a lot of these issues. Just go talk to people. And when I say go talk to people, I mean really listen to them. Ask them why. As a product manager, I always stick to the rule of 5 whys. I'm going to ask you why 5 times, and the first answer and the 5th answer you give me are going to be completely different. Why? Why do you do that? Why do you think that? Why? 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 Get down to the core of what is driving people's behavior. Deeply understand how they're using your technology product and really empathize with them. Put yourself in their shoes. This is how we build trust in technology products. Building trust isn't easy, but it's what sets you apart. The journey is very difficult and full of obstacles. This is not something you're going to do overnight, but I promise you it is worth it. You will build products that people love, that people use, that are hard for people to stop using. Trust is the future of technology products, and I really encourage you to think a lot about how your products today are building or breaking trust with your users. That's all I've got. Thank you. Any time for questions? Got time for a couple of questions?
2 questions. First, I noticed on your example about the email and the helpful error message, that's kind of a little bit of a 2 things that conflict with each other because it's a helpful message that helps build trust in the application, but also that could be farmed for, like, let's say you were trying to figure out if someone's email is legitimate and you were putting in their name at, whatever.com, and then it splashes back.
Absolutely.
It doesn't send the message, you're sort of, exploiting it. So what do you do when those 2 things sort of conflict with each other?
Yeah, that's a common concern when you use these sort of signals that you're onto something. You don't want to sort of tip people off that they've got the right information. For example, if your email is in a password dump and I go and plop that in here and it tells me, oh, you've got an account, like I can just cycle through passwords now. There are ways to go and do this. There are things like I'm thinking of Fun Captcha. is a way to detect human presence and only show this error message when human presence is detected. There's lots of ways that you can get around that. I think you bring up a great point, though, is that we definitely do have to be cognizant about how the experiences we're building can create security holes by being helpful to users. People are very fickle beings. Like we need a lot of guidance, and sometimes that guidance can be used against us. That's one of those, like, hopefully you're on a security team somewhere asking these questions about your own product. Great question.
My second question is, with the advent of like deep learning and neural network AIs, how do you build trust in something that not even the people that built it know how it works?
Really great question. I don't think we have answers to those. In fact, I think that is one of the most interesting questions about artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think we're starting to figure that out with machine learning. I don't even think we have an idea of how to think about that in AI. One interesting piece about AI that I like to look at is actually science fiction. I actually think you can look to science fiction for a lot of ways to grapple with these types of philosophical questions, but that will be a huge problem in the future.
Anybody else?
As we're looking for the questions, I will also mention that if you're fascinated by these problems, Duo has openings across the board in all of our departments. We would love for you to come join us to help build trust online.
So obviously you're not a big fan of the Alexa, and I'm super curious, since your trust has been broken like this far down, is there anything they could come out with to make you go, yeah, let's give that Alexa another go?
So what's funny is I actually own all of the devices. I have an Alexa, a Google Home, and an Apple HomePod. My HomePod is the only thing that is still plugged in. I would say I'm fascinated by them. I actually do, again, read the release notes about things. I will say that opt-in default drop-in thing, the settings screen today is a lot better than it was back in September. It's one where I believe in these technologies because they're just fundamentally growing in usage. So it would be remiss for me not to think of these. When I look at the technologies themselves, for voice assistants and always-on microphones and things, the ability to turn it off. With Alexa, that's a hardware-software button. I don't know how I feel about that. Actually, HomePod doesn't have a physical button to turn it off, which I don't know how I feel about that, but I trust Apple more than I do other companies. The Google Home Mini has a switch, a little physical switch to turn it on and turn it off. Interestingly enough, that setting doesn't really protect itself. It's not like the Red Ring that is very clear about intention. I don't know. I will see what the future hardware for Alexa brings. I will say adding video cameras to Alexa I don't think is the right direction. And it's only more reasons why I will continue to not use Alexa, but it's an interesting consideration. Other questions?
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.